We now have Surranna Sandy, who's the Executive Director with Skills for Change. She has used these software in her organization, and she will speak to her experience out there. She has 15 years of executive leadership experience in private and non-profit sector. In her leadership role as Executive Director of Skills for Change, which is a not-for-profit agency known for pioneering newcomers program that respond to shifting immigration and workplace trends. With the Skills for Change moving into 31st year of service to newcomers in Greater Toronto area, Surranna is ensuring that agency continues to respect its vision in seeing every immigrant succeed in Canada. Please help me welcome Surranna Sandy.
Hello everyone, good evening. I'm going to be a little different presentation. There's not going to be a lot of numbers and analysis and methodologies. I am going to speak about Skills for Change, our organization, how we work with Sam, and the particular project that Sam came on board to support us in doing some social impact measurement. So about Skills for Change. Skills for Change was established in 1982. Initially we were established to work with women, and our first clients were Vietnamese people who came over fleeing the war, and we started a program to give them office training, and we had 6 typewriters donated by IBM to help them enter into the labor market. And so every one of those initial individuals got jobs in their fields, and 31 years later, Skills for Change provides services to 14,000 people annually in 5 locations across the GTA, and we have over 100 employees. We're funded all levels of government, and also, of course, corporate sponsors, and we are a United Way agency. So currently what we do with Skills for Change is very multifaceted. So we provide employment services, we do language training, we actually pioneered mentoring in the GTA over 20 years ago, created a mentoring model, and then actually were instrumental in the creation of TiESep, which you may be familiar with it as the Mentoring Partnership Corporate, and we created the City of Toronto's first internal mentoring initiative that is now growing significantly, and we had to take that model and roll it out across the GTA. We also established something that was unique to Canada, which was a sector-specific training programs, which we call STIC, that you had employment training for specific sectors, engineering, retail, healthcare, etc. So we were able to pioneer that across this whole sector and really change the sector in terms of how we look at employment services. So what happened for us is that we, even though we were providing a lot of employment services and language training, etc., we initially started as a women's organization. Within about 3 to 4 years, Skills for Change were more broad services. So it wasn't just women, it was both genders got access to our services. So we shifted away from being gender specific in service delivery. Our mission is about providing learning and training opportunities for immigrants and refugees. With shifting in funding and priorities at the various levels of government, we end up actually, even though our mission and vision is oriented to immigrants, we actually provide services to any Canadian. In addition to immigrant population, because we are Employment Ontario programming, and that means that if anybody can be serviced through our employment training centers. And we just started providing employment services to youth. So it's a new demographic, it's new to the agency. So in terms of how we started working with Sam, as I said, we were a women's organization initially, and we moved away from that. But anecdotal evidence show that there are unique needs and priorities that immigrant women really had that we weren't able to understand fully and customize solutions. So we started looking at immigrant women in leadership, and we understand that immigrant women, are critical to creating really strong communities, adding great value, but they were not as economically integrated as immigrant men. Even though they may have had the same education levels or relevant experiences, they weren't integrated economically. And they had, various barriers that prevented them from being, fully engaged in the broader Canadian society, such as childcare, low income, language challenges, isolation, and then of course there are gender-based violence issues that they face, and of course there were other barriers that they have in terms of not fully integrated culturally. So we needed to figure out how do we shine a lens on immigrant women. What do we need to do for them uniquely? What are their needs? What are the barriers? What are the concerns? So right now, immigrant women are about 50% of our clients. So we're 14,000 clients, 7,000 are immigrant women that we see in our 5 locations. And we do a lot of assessments per year with them to see what their needs are, their language, their employment, their mentoring, their settlements needs. And we recognize that they had all these issues and challenges, underemployment, even though the Canadian immigrant population is growing at 14%, per year, is faster than Canadian born, they were not fully engaged in the labor market. And as such, if they're not fully engaged in the labor market, they're not fully consuming. So that was a big issue for us. So we decided to take a look at immigrant women needs by doing a research project. So we got funding from Status of Women Canada, and we conducted research, and we called it this agenda-based analysis. So agenda-based analysis is shining a gender lens on the service delivery. And this was a 3-year project. We got funding from Status of Women Canada, and we engaged a gender lens specialist, and we did some comprehensive research. And the research was really interesting. We ended up being an over 200-page report that we were able to generate, and the methodology was 6 3-hour client focus groups, and also we integrated 1 3-hour staff focus group. And we wanted to get both a sense of what the clients think their needs were, and compare that to what our counselors thought the clients' needs were, so we can see what the disparity were in those individuals. And so the top 5 barriers that we saw coming through is the cultural challenges that immigrant women have in sort of navigating the Canadian culture. That was a real problem in 2 worlds colliding. And just give you an example. We have an office in Flemington Park, which is designated as a high priority neighborhood by United Way. And what we find is a lot of immigrant women in that area, they would come in to Canada and they will not be they will stay in that small geographic area. They very rarely go outside of that area in terms of shopping or work or socializing. And then because the community, the languages, the home language was spoken openly there, their foods, the shops, the restaurants, everything. So they left another country, came to Canada, have a small pocket of their culture. So it was very hard for them when they want to enter the labor market to be Canadian, even though they were here for 5, 10, many years. So that was a real challenge. And then of course, there is that whole issue of the Canadian experience. And even though recently we have the Ontario Human Rights Commission bringing in a policy that makes it discriminatory and illegal to say that you need Canadian experience anymore. So no employer could be able to say in a job ad or an interview that you need Canadian experience. That is a big barrier. That's a really big issue. And it's not just about the experience. It is the confidence that comes with being engaged in the labor market. So they lack that. And so the lack of experience, the lack of confidence, those are big issues. And the other challenge is what happens with a lot of our clients, even though a lot of them are professionals, when both husband and if they have spouse comes, the challenge is deciding who will enter the labor market if they have children. And as a result, it usually means that the male partner will enter the labor market, the woman stays at home, which of course reduces our economic integration and of course created some sort of, depending on their structure, some isolation. And it's harder after 2-3 years out of the labor market for Canadians to re-enter. Imagine having an immigrant woman with language barriers, lack of a network and connection to re-enter the labor market. So that obligation to be caregivers for their children or parents is a big barrier for them. And of course the language issue. So not being able to speak the language creates challenge in that there is isolation because you cannot build a network because you don't have the connections. And then there is confidence because you don't speak the language, you have a concern about trying to enter the labor market because you don't think you can communicate at a level necessary to be engaged in work. And of course the other piece about the whole part of the gender-based analysis is identifying what leadership truly means, defining it and identifying areas that we can enhance leadership within the group of immigrant women. So this is an interesting quote from one of the participants who said, I want to contribute, not be a burden to society. So a lot of the individuals in that initial research piece, they really wanted the tools and resources to add value to Canada. They didn't want to be a burden to Canada. And there's always the assumption that people are, we hear feedback where they feel like people think that we're here to take, but we want to give back, we want to be engaged. So that really just sums that up. And so through the research that we did, this is what we found in terms of what is preventing immigrant women from going into leadership roles, etc. So I touched on the fact there's language and communication, inability to look for opportunity because of obligation, unemployment, confidence issues in that they do not want to engage in job search because they don't feel confident to do that, the cultural differences that prevents them from understanding the norms that is required, and of course because they're busy working a survival job, they don't have the time to actually go get that career job because they need a survival job to sustain their families, and of course money, lack of money. And a small percentage of those is those who are refugees. As such, they're not able to enter the labor market legally until they have those specific work permits or permanent residency. So based on those barriers, we came up with a Leaders in Residence initiative. And so here, we wanted immigrant women to come up with programs and initiatives that would try to address in some way these 8 barriers. So through the initiatives that they have, we can take steps to reduce these barriers for immigrant women. So there's a multiplicity of initiatives from a television show, a fellow network, an empowerment program, and bringing settlement services to Durham region, to Cobourg area, where there's a lot of immigrants in that area, but there's not a lot of services like language training or settlements, and there's one center for Peterborough and all the different surrounding regions for all the newcomers, that are there over 25, 40,000 people. So we're trying to build these initiatives so that these immigrant women can develop their leadership skills and develop programming that would hopefully address and reduce these particular barriers. So how did we come to work with Anshula and her team at SAM? So Social Asset Measurements was hired as a project evaluator, and they came on board in spring 2012. So this initiative is going to end, the funding ends December 2014. The Leaders in Residence are currently implementing their projects, and part of that is for SAM to do the to work and do the evaluation. So the first thing that SAM did for us was to complete an impact map of the agency in the intake and direct service stream. So there's a process. When someone comes into the agency, they would meet with an intake and referral counselor who will do comprehensive assessments to figure out where we can funnel the individual within the agency. So what are their needs and gaps? Do they need more language training? Is it employment? Is it mentoring? Is it settlement? Is it mental health that we need to refer outside? So they would do that initial assessment. So, but our initial proposal to Status of Women Canada was to put a gender lens and survey evaluation in all intake processes across Skills for Change. That's a lot. I mean, we're a pretty significant amount of work will be done. There's 14,000 clients, which means there's 14,000 assessments. There are, various programs, etc. So there was some complexity in doing an initiative like that, and the funding didn't really support a broad agency part. So Sam advised that by evaluating one employment preparation program as a control group would result in more accurate measurements for us. So we selected our job search workshop, and this is a Citizenship and Immigration Canada funded program that is designed for permanent residents and conventional refugees and living caregivers. It has 2 modules, and it's really based on the needs of the individuals. This is a standard program. It's actually a pretty good program to evaluate because, of course, it's controlled, but it's also a structured, the same curriculum is used across Canada for all. This is part of, we get funded as part of a $300 million funded initiative, and we get a pocket of that funding to deliver this particular program. So the way it's structured is they learn how to, the participants learn how to access the labor market, hiring practices, and once they've graduated, we hope that they have the job search skills and capabilities to, successfully enter the labor market. So at this point in time, we are in the intake stage of evaluation with SAM. So this, it took a little longer because there was some transition in terms of personnel in the program and in the agency. But we started in spring 2012 where SAM was contracted to come on board as the evaluator. And then this summer we started the impact mapping with across the agency, the management team. And last fall, 2012, we developed the intake survey and procedures. And then last December, we started looking at the intake service with launch within the job search workshop. So we're getting clients in that stream to complete the surveys and then share that data with SAM. So far, in terms of the challenges we see in doing this measurement, we have had 58 intake surveys distributed, 11 intake surveys mid-void, 47 complete intake surveys. We noticed that the registration numbers are lower than we thought we would have, so that obviously have an impact in pushing our timeline forward. Even though the surveys are anonymous, SAM embedded 2 indicated questions that would link the intake and post-survey to individual clients. There's a flaw in the process. It reveals that some participants didn't answer these key questions, so those surveys have to be removed from the evaluation. In terms of other issues, in terms of personnel and data entry, it's creating a little challenge in terms of getting that. However, there are some successes. We are in the final stage of gathering the survey data. We have some information that we can start doing analysis of. What we want to do with measuring, doing this social impact measurement for us was critical in terms of looking at the GBA findings to evaluate the programs and services within Skills for Change to make specific changes based on looking at the issues from a gender lens. So we can see that maybe how we do intake, how we do service delivery, how programs are developed and implemented impact women negatively, and how can we reduce this negative impact. Additionally, we are mandated in our program to develop toolkits and resources both for our agency and into the broader employment services sector. So all of this will occur once the comprehensive evaluation is completed by Sheila and her team. And we'll be able to use that data to see what the impact have been of our, Status of Women Canada-funded gender-based analysis project. So, does anyone have any questions?
It's a little detailed question.
Sure.
I might have misunderstood, but you said they were confidential interviews.
Yes.
But there were 2 key questions that allowed you to know who answered the question, so that's not confidential. How does that work?
Well, not a person, but I mean, I'm sure I could speak specifically to why this was integrated
like
in there.
like
Yeah. Did you want to address why we did that in the 2 questions?
Those are ID numbers.
Yeah.
So
It's not a person, like an individual. It's just
ID
the link.
So what the issue is that we needed to have pre and post surveys. So we needed to be able to link, person 1 pre, person 1 post. So we had ID numbers. There was no confidentiality.
Got it.
That was
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Tough
Yes.
question.
Another question, slightly outside one of the points you made was that I can't remember which tribunal it was it the Canadian Employment
The Ontario Human Rights.
Ontario
Commission.
Human Rights Commission recently decided that Canadian experience was not a valid reason for stopping an immigrant to get a job or preventing an immigrant? Is that?
So there is a new policy that was launched by the commission. So any employer, whether it's in a job ad or in an interview, who stipulates that Canadian experience is a requirement of a job, that is a ground for discrimination, and you have a case that you can bring forward to the commission in respect to that. So yes, it is now a firm policy. It's only provincial, of course, because it's Ontario, but hoping that there is political will to make sure that it can go across Canada.
Okay, so my question is, have any of the survey participants or anyone you speak to, have they come back to you and said, okay, they're not saying Canadian experience, but they're using something else as a proxy for Canadian experience?
The policy was just launched in the summer. So it was just officially rolled out in the summer. So we have anecdotal, feedback, but nothing specific to this particular group from our other employment programs and services. And there's always going to be a way that employers can get around that. They can look at your name, your spelling of your name, where you went to school, and where your countries that you worked in. They could use any other things as a way to eliminate immigrants from the pool. But in terms of clients specifically saying that they use something else, not at this point. I think it's a little bit new. Not a lot of people are familiar yet that this is a particular cause that they can use, as it's just been rolled out, and the Human Rights Commission has been a lot of marketing and promotion of it, to the fact that and we in the nonprofit sector, employment services, we have always sort of said things like, we'll help you get a placement or a volunteer so you can get Canadian experience, and we ourselves have to change that as we do programming. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but employees have to be aware that they will be legally culpable for using that as a means to screen people out of jobs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.